It's the 8th of October and we're somehow surviving the school holidays. And I'm only just checking in with you now instead of at the start of the month because it's been pretty hectic and I haven't done a lot of super interesting knitting. So I'm working on my sister's cushion covers and I finished the front in September. So the last couple of weeks have just been working on the back piece, which is all garter stitch. It is corner to corner, but it's just mostly garter stitch. So there's not really too much that's interesting about it, but it has made for a really good knitting over the last week or so because the holidays this time around have just been a bit hectic. A lot of the things my daughter would normally do have been cancelled for various reasons. So I've had to come up with a new schedule and do all these different activities. So it's been quite a bit. But there have been a lot of points where I've just been sitting around watching kids play on stuff. So we went to this giant inflatable bouncy castle a little while ago and she just played on that for 2 hours, I think. So I got to just sit and knit and chat with her friends' parents. And I've taken the kids to playgrounds and they just run around while I'm knitting. So that's been really nice and it's a good knit for that. So I finished the front panel of the cushions in September and then I'm done with the bottom of the back panel and now I've got to work on the top of the back panel. And the interesting part about that is that I need to figure out how to add an I-cord edge, but I want to do that this morning because we are going to the movies this afternoon and it's a kids movie, so I'm not too fussed about actually paying attention. So I'd like to actually have my knitting.
So I figured out how to make the I-cord edging work and I cast on right before we went into the movies. This is how much I managed to get done there, but I made a pretty obvious mistake. I thought this would be simple enough to do in the cinema, but I really should have put a stitch marker in so it would be easier to tell in the dark where the I-cord edges started. Also, I just realised we're 2 minutes into this video and I haven't introduced myself or this project properly. I'm Katrina Walser from Oliphant Cat, and this is a cushion cover I'm making for my sister based on the Stella quilt blanket pattern by Laura Penrose. I decided to try and fix the mistake, and to be honest, I just messed around with a crochet hook until it looked sort of right, so I have no idea how I actually fixed it, and you can still sort of see it, but it's a lot less noticeable than the initial mistake was.
So I worked on this a bit more and I've gotten to the ends of the increases. So I just need to start working straight to make this a rectangle. And I figured that it'd be a good time to tell you how I'm actually doing this I-cord edge. So at the end of every right side row, you normally slip 1 stitch. And so what I'm doing instead is that I cast on an extra 2 stitches at the very beginning of the piece. And instead of slipping 1 stitch, I'm slipping 3 stitches. And then on the wrong side row, I purl the first 3 stitches and then do the rest of the row as written. So it's a pretty simple change. It took me a sec to figure out how to do, but it's working out nicely, except for the points where I made mistakes in the movies. I am getting a little bit bored of this though. It's been a solid week and a half of just working on this piece in just garter stitch. And so luckily, I'm actually doing some work with Morris & Sons, who are a yarn company here in Australia, who I really, really love. And they just let me know that the yarn that I need for the projects that I'm doing with them has come in. So I'm going to go pick that up and then I'll start a second project. So I've got something going at the same time as this.
So I was actually organised for once and weighed and catalogued the new yarn before putting it away. One tip I have if you're weighing lots of balls of the same yarn is that I weigh one of the yarn labels before weighing the whole lot. That way you can weigh the whole batch of yarn without taking the label off every ball, then you just multiply the weight of the label by the number of balls you have and subtract that from the total so you end up with an accurate weight for the yarn itself. My usual process for adding to my Ravelry stash is that I add the yarn details and weight on the computer, then take all the photos on my phone. Ravelry has a feature where you can go to a yarn entry on the website and take and upload a photo directly from there instead of messing around with your camera app, and I found using that makes the whole process much easier. For the first pattern I'm working on with Morris & Sons, I'm using their Empire in 4-ply held together with Rowan Kid Silk Haze to make a new mohair version of my Homecoming Honeycombs beanie. The contrast neutral colour is Morris & Sons Estate in 8-ply. The cast on for this uses a pinhole cast on, which I do with a crochet hook, but you can do it on normal knitting needles too. Homecoming Honeycombs is one of my favourite patterns. It uses slip stitch knitting to create a really lovely design that's actually very easy to knit. And when I sat down to cast on, I meant to just get started, but I'd forgotten how potato chippy the pattern is, and I ended up working on it for way longer than I thought I would.
Okay, so I finished the crown of my beanie and it was a super fun knit. I've forgotten how much I enjoyed this pattern, and so it went really quickly. But then I stopped and looked at it and I realized that I don't love the colors. So let me show you what I've gotten up to. The mohair and the blue speckled color are turning out really nicely together, but there's just not enough contrast with this dark gray. And especially because I'm planning on this being a sample for a pattern, I really need it to photograph well, and I don't think that this will. So I tried a lighter gray just to see what it looked like. This is just out of my stash and it looks much better. So I'm going to go back to Morris & Sons and get something that's more along the lines of this color, and then I'm going to frog and start again.
Mohair is notoriously hard to frog, but one of the tips I've heard that's meant to make it easier is to throw it in the freezer for a while. It was going to be a while before I could get back out to the shop, so I took the beanie off the needles and threw it in a Ziploc bag to freeze in the meantime. One of the new yarns I got is this lovely peacock blue in Morris & Sons Empire 8-ply for a second sample of the beanie that I'm making that uses solid colours. I figured I'd learn my lesson from the mohair project and actually test the colours I was planning to use for this sample. It turned out to be a good idea because I swatched it with both greys I had and I didn't like either of them, so I managed to pick up a new contrast colour for that sample too when I went into the store. Because the beanies were on hold before I could get out to the shop, I spent a decent chunk of time working on my cushion cover project again. The timing worked out pretty well because I managed to cast it off on the bus home from Morris & Sons, so I could get started on the beanies again without having another whip hanging over my head. I'm not sure if it was the time spent in the freezer, but frogging the mohair ended up being way less painful than I'd expected. Interestingly enough, it didn't stick to itself that much, so frogging the mohair sections was fine, but it did really want to stick to the wool of the contrast colour, so those parts took a little bit more work to unravel. I cast on the sample again and it knit up in a flash, but I realised part of the way through the brim that I'd had a bit too much fun. The pattern part of the beanie was a good 3 centimeters longer than it was meant to be. I frogged it back again so it was the right length and redid the brim. There was no way I was going to try and separate the mohair from the 4-ply yarn I'd held it with, so this little ball of frogged yarn is just going to live in my stash with the yarns held together.
Okay, so in the last couple of weeks it's been unseasonably warm. There's some sort of heat wave going on, and the temperatures have been getting to higher than it normally gets to in the summer here in Sydney, and it's only spring. So today is the worst of the predicted days, I think. It's about 35, 36 degrees, which is normally like height of summer sort of temperatures. But it does mean that it's a good day for blocking. So I have a bunch of things that I need to block. I'm going to just get them all done in one hit. So I'll show you what I've got to do and then we'll get to actually blocking them. So we have the beanie that I just finished. I need to block that. And then we've also got my sister's cushion cover pieces. So here's the front panel that I had done at the end of last month. I need to weave the ends in still, and then we'll give that a block. And then I've also got the back panels. So I don't know if I've actually shown you these yet, but I did finish the back panels. So here's the first one, and here's the second one. And so again, I need to weave the ends in and then give those a block. And then lastly, I have my son's Christmas stocking, which hasn't seen the live day for quite a while, but there it is. I do need to give this a block, and then there's a bit of work left to do up top, but we'll get to that after it's dried.
If you ever want to make a Stella quilt blanket, one of the things I need to warn you about is that there are so many ends to weave in. I tried my best to weave some in as I went, and I'll link to the video for the method that I used for that up here in the corner. But there was still a lot I needed to do before blocking. So if you've been here for a while, this is all going to look familiar. I've blocked my knitting the same way for years and years. This bucket is new though. It was kindly sent to me a few months ago by Strucket, who are an Aussie company based up in Queensland. So I always start off by filling up the tub and adding some soak, and because this lot of knits has a lot of different colours in it, I'm adding in a few colour catcher sheets too. Everything gets left in there until it's nice and wet, and then I keep the knits in the strainer in the Strucket and drain out the water. Then this part's a bit controversial, but after I've squeezed the water out of the knits into a towel, I throw them into the washing machine on a spin cycle. The first time I did this was pretty scary, but I've been doing it for years now and I've never had anything felt, and everything dries so much faster. Blocking beanies is always fun. I use a balloon to make sure it gets the right shape. You just pop a balloon into the middle of the beanie and then blow it up until it looks right. One tip I have is that you really don't have to blow it up as much as you think you do. Heads are actually quite a bit smaller than a fully blown up balloon, and you only want to blow it up to stretch out the top. You don't want to stretch out the ribbing. Then I just pop the balloon into a cup and leave it to dry. The other pieces needed to be blocked flat, and the cushion covers needed to be measured out. Wet garter stitch stretches a lot, so make sure that if you have specific dimensions you need to hit, you actually measure them as you block them. When the pieces were wet, they seemed like they were way too big, but I squished the material a bit to hit the size I needed, and once they dried, they had sprung back to the correct size. Then I took it all outside to dry to try and take advantage of the heat.
So the pieces of my cushion cover dried really quickly yesterday because of how intense and hot and windy the weather was. So I can put them all together now. So this is the orientation that my sister wanted. This is going to be the top here and that's the bottom. She drew me a handy little diagram which I found crumpled on the floor, but at least I found it. So that was handy. So for an envelope pillow, what you're doing is you're making one front piece and then you're making two separate back pieces, a top and a bottom, and the top and the bottom overlap for a section here, and then so they can sort of fold around the top and the bottom of the pillow and then meet back up at the back. So my top piece is this piece, and I know that because it has the handy I-cord running along the edge. So you put the right side of the front piece facing up, and then to seam it all together, you put the wrong side of the back pieces facing up, and you lay the top half down first, like this, and then you lay the bottom half with the wrong side facing up. And that's going to go like that. Now, this pattern has slip stitches along each edge, which makes it really easy to seam together because you can just match each stitch together and sew them together one for one. So I'm going to do that with a crochet hook, and I'll get to work.
I had a little ball of yarn left over from when I'd frogged some of the cushion backs, and it was a bit crinkly, so I used that for seaming. I decided to hold the yarn double for the seams. It felt like it might make the seams more secure, and I honestly just wanted to use up more yarn.
Hi, so my pillow inserts arrived, They come in this funny vacuum rolled little tube, and then you take them out and let them air out, and they fluff up into a giant pillow. So here it is. This is the back, obviously. And one thing I just wanted to check when I actually got the pillow was whether or not I need a button to close it up. So sometimes with these sorts of pillows, if you don't make the overlap between the top and the bottom panel long enough, it sort of springs open a bit and it wants to like gape like this. But this seems fine, so I don't think I need a button. I'm pretty much done. I just need to weave in the ends and we'll be good to go.
Once the cushion was done, I could start working on my second beanie sample. The contrast colour I ended up picking was this royal blue, which was a bit outside of my usual colour palette. For most of these beanies, I've chosen a bright variegated main colour and a very neutral contrast. But since these were going to be two solid colours, I thought doing something a bit more colourful could be fun, so I figured it was worth a try. The last project I wanted to work on this month was the Christmas stocking I blocked earlier. This is a stocking I started for my son last Christmas, but I didn't quite finish it in time, so I definitely wanted to get it done this month to make sure it was ready for him this year. I'd finished all of the knitting on this months ago and was just procrastinating on the final non-knitting tasks for it. The first thing to do was add his name. For this stocking, I'm doing his actual name on one side and a nickname on the other. I do all of my charting in an app called Stitch Fiddle, and luckily I still had the name charts that I'd done for my daughter and my niece's stockings, so I could reference back to them. The nickname was pretty easy to chart out, but his actual name is really long. I'd realised as I was knitting that if I kept using 8-ply yarn for the section where I was going to embroider his name, I'd run out of stitches to write Jonathan into. So what I did is that for the top of the stocking, I stopped working in the round and knit the two halves flat in 4-ply yarn. On one side I held the 4-ply double, so it was about the same as an 8-ply yarn, but for the other side I held it single, which meant I had more stitches to work with. I ran into a snag when I went to start sewing the name in because I didn't have a 4-ply yarn in a colour that matched the rest of the stocking. I decided to take one of the 8-ply yarns I'd used in the stocking and pull the plies apart to make it thinner. I honestly wouldn't recommend doing this. It took ages and the yarn ended up being quite fragile and hard to sew with. To do the sewing, I used duplicate stitch, so each box in the chart was one stitch on the stocking. For those of you who don't know, duplicate stitch is a way of embroidering into knitting where you pass your sewing needle over the stitches to mimic the way the yarn is knit together. I'll pop a link to a tutorial video for it up in the corner here.
Okay, so it's the last day of the month and there's one last thing I will need to do. I have to sew the lining into my stocking and then we're going to finish the I-cord at the top. And I thought that I was going to have to watch an old video to figure out how I did this, but then I looked at my old Ravelry project and I actually had really good instructions for it. So I'll walk you through now how I need to do it.
So before we start, I have to say, I'm not a very experienced sewer and this is just lining for the stocking, so I was definitely going for speed over accuracy here. If you know how to sew and I do anything that makes you want to shout at the screen, please let me know in the comments so I can learn how to do this better for next time. The first thing I did was lay two pieces of material on top of each other with the wrong sides facing out. Then I roughly traced the outline of the stocking onto them and cut it out. I sewed the two pieces together with a pretty small seam allowance so that the lining would be a bit smaller than the stocking, then cut the excess off with my picking shears so the edges wouldn't fray. When I traced the stocking, I added a lot of extra material to the top of the stocking and I left it open when I sewed it together. That meant I could make a top hem by folding the excess at the top down, and I ironed it to press the fold into it. I do own an ironing board, but I couldn't be bothered pulling it out, so I just ironed on a blocking mat. To sew the lining in, I stuffed it into the stocking, then hand stitched the top fold together with the row of knitting under the bind off. I just did a rough back stitch. It's nothing to write home about, but it got the job done. The final step was to do the I-cord edging at the top. I picked up stitches from the bind off, then bound them back off with an I-cord bind off, pausing halfway through to knit some actual I-cord to form the hanging loop. I forgot to mention that this pattern is called Triangle and Reindeer Stockings by Jenny Williams, and it has full instructions on how to do the I-cord in it. And once that was all finished, I was finally done. So it's the end of October, and I'm actually really happy with the progress that I've made this month. So I know I haven't shown you the final state for most of the FOs, so I figured I'd do a wrap-up video to show you what they all looked like and also to give you a stash update. So here's Jonathan's stocking. I'm really happy with how it turned out, and I'm mostly just glad that it's off the needles. I've had this on my needles for about a year, and I just wanted to make sure I had it ready for December because I missed last Christmas, and I wanted to make sure I had it ready for this Christmas. The very top is a little bit tight, and it's made the name buckle in a little bit. So I don't really know what happened there, but if I can be bothered at some point, I'll redo the lining and make the top of it a little bit wider. But for now, it's looking pretty good, and I'm happy with how it's turned out. Then for the beanies, this is what the mohair sample turned out like. It's looking pretty cool, and it's nice and warm and fuzzy. And then the second sample was actually a kid size. And I know I said the palette was a little bit out of my normal comfort zone. And I'm really glad that I tried it out because I really love how it turned out. It's very nice and mermaidy. And so I got my daughter to model this for the pattern photos, and we took some nice shots. And they will be in the pattern on the Morris & Sons website in December or so. And so that version will be on their site. But if you would just like a copy of the original version, then it's available on Ravelry now, and I'll link to that below. If you specifically want the mohair one though, then I will give you an update when it's on there. And then the last thing is the cushion cover. And so here it is. Here is my giant squishy monstrosity. It is so big. And she wants 2 of these, so I think they'll take up a large proportion of her sofa space or her bed if that's where she ends up putting them. But it looks really beautiful. I'm very proud of how it turned out. And I just want to sit around and cuddle it. I can't even sort of fit my arms around it properly. But it's very lovely and, I don't know, just cozy. So it's a bit too big to actually show you properly. So I'll try and insert some B-roll here of what it looks like in all of its giant triangle colored glory. So in terms of a stash update, for the month, I managed to get 2,028 meters out of my stash, which is pretty decent. Now, most of that wasn't actually knit this month because both the front of the pillow and especially the stocking were all done previously. And they were just sort of long running things that I needed to finish off. But I count things out of my stash when they become finished objects. So 2,028 meters, pretty decent. Now for the total, I still have 40,891 meters in my stash, which if you're following along is more than was in my total stash last month. And so I think because the Morris & Sons yarn had a t-shirt quantity of 4-ply yarn in it, that really blew the numbers out quite a bit. So I am still adding to my stash faster than I can get stuff out, unfortunately. The reality is that I think it's just going to be like that for a while because I do this for work. And so there are just going to be some times when I have to get some yarn in to do a project or work on a pattern.
And so I need to just be okay with that. But hopefully next month, I will have gotten some stuff out of my stash and the total will be down. So speaking of next month, the one whip that I'm carrying into November is the second of my sister's cushion covers. So I didn't catch any footage of this, but I was actually chipping away on this while I was in between projects this month. So when the knits were all drying after I blocked them, or if I didn't have anything cast on because I needed a sec to think about it or some time to actually sit down and cast something on, then I would just chip away on this in the background. So this is the bottom half of the front. And then because I didn't enjoy knitting the bottom and the top of the back one after the other for the first cushion cover, just because it was a bit monotonous, I decided to cast on the bottom half of the back. So I'll finish this off and then I'll finish the front part and then I'll do the top half of the back. I also have a big project that I need to start next month, which is yet another present, but I will show you what that is in November. So if you would like to follow along with my progress and find out what my new project is, then you can subscribe to the channel by hitting the button down below, or you can press this button right here. And if you'd like to catch up on previous episodes of the podcast, then there is a playlist of all of them right here. But until next time, I've been Kat from Oliphant Cat. Happy knitting!